So see, I remember that, Kaja. And I'm just going to share the screen. Hopefully that'll work. It's funny, anytime you anytime you get into new technology, it's like you're starting all over again. Like it should be easy, but it's not. Anyway, is that working?
Yeah, I can see it anyway. Perfect.
So Mike, we talked a little bit about a graph and kind of using that as a touch point as we go through our discussion. Do you have stuff like, are these slides going to be okay for you to go through? Or
they should be fine. I didn't get that tidied up, unfortunately, graph.
That's fine. No, I didn't think you would. So we can just, what we'll do is I'll go through the first part. So I have to do an introduction, and the agenda and everything else, and I'll kind of cover some of the playbook, and then we'll just basically stop on the graph, and we'll just use that as a departure point for our conversation. And there's a lot of things that we can probably cover just by going through what we talked about the last time.
And you know yourself, like I will continue to talk.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let me know what's relevant and what isn't relevant. You know, if I'm going down a path that isn't going to be relevant for the audience, then please do stop me, because obviously, you know, I'm happy to discuss what is relevant, but I don't know the audience as well as you do. So, you know, whatever signal that is that you want to do, maybe it's just talking over me and pausing me. That'll be fine.
I'll do this. I'll hold the hands up. Yeah, so just for people coming in, we're going to get started in about 5 minutes. We're just letting people join us, and they're continuing to join us as Michael and I have our chats. So sorry that we're not starting until 12:05 for those of you who've come really early, and welcome. But we'll get into it fairly soon. So just bear with us, grab a cup of tea or coffee, and we'll be having our conversation pretty soon. And Michael, just the idea today, I think, is just to have a conversation. It's, you know, what I'd like to do is try to involve the attendees as much as possible, whether through the chat or, you know, whatever way we can do it. There's Q&A as well there.
Yeah.
That we have to work out how to upvote questions, but there will be questions in there as well. So essentially, what we want to do is cover the basics of what we want to discuss, and then hopefully bring in a bit of a conversation. There's usually a stall. There's usually a point where we finish talking, and then it's like, now everybody else can contribute and ask questions. And there's usually a point where they're like, really? Can we really have this like conversation with you? So hopefully we get over that and we get some interesting conversation going. I also want to find out exactly where people are coming from in terms of their business. So we'll ask that a little bit later.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And obviously I'm happy to share anything that people want to ask me. I'm more than open and honest about it. So yeah, please do not be afraid to ask the things that are burning questions, or even just parts I haven't maybe explained myself as much detail as I could be.
Well, I definitely think that you're going to have to sell yourself at the beginning, because one of the things I want you to do is maybe talk a little bit about your background so that people know where you're coming from, because it mightn't be immediately obvious, although we did promote you like crazy coming up to the event. But we will kind of talk a little bit about your history and stuff and where you're coming from at the start. So plenty of people joining us now, which is reasonable enough because everybody went off to make their coffee, and I'm seeing everybody join us. Hiya, Katie, I see you're joining us. And Eamon is there as well. Hiya, Clwyd. Few familiar names there already. Louise Durkin. Yeah, there's a few people there that I would recognize. And if I don't call you out by name at the moment, it's just because I'm not putting it together with the chat here. There's Paul Kavanagh saying hi. And Margarita. I remember Margarita from, I think Margarita, you've come to most of the hugs, haven't you? I'm pretty sure I recognize you from the other hugs. Yes, I got a yes from Margarita, cool. And we met at the hugs, yeah, I remember we met. But remind me your company again, Margarita. Where do you work again? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we had a good conversation. Okay, just a couple more minutes before we get into it, and just some new things to kind of note as you come in. This isn't Zoom, so we're on a new technology. HubSpot has very generously shared with us this new technology called Bevy, which integrates with HubSpot and is, for all intents and purposes, hopefully a better experience than Zoom, if we can figure out how to work it properly. So bear with us as we deal with this new tech on Bevy, which is our conference platform, our virtual event platform that we're using today. I'll take you through it step by step as to what's there, but feel free to explore, particularly the panel to the, am I pointing the right way, Michael? Is it that way or that way where the chat is? I'm looking at it. I'm looking at it that way.
Yeah, the first way you pointed.
That way?
No,
that way. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Chat panel is over there, and in there you can just post your comments. What I'll do is I'll just throw up a bit of an icebreaker for those of you coming in. A lot has happened since our last hug. We've had a couple of virtual ones, and people are kind of getting used to virtual events and webinars and all the rest of it. But just in the chat as you're coming in and as you're kind of getting ready for our conversation today, just post in the chat your number one way to focus when working from home, which I find really difficult to do because at the best of times I'm pulled in lots of different directions. So give us the number one way you've used to focus when you're at home. And in my case, your baby's pulling at your knee when you're having a conversation like this with Michael. And then dogs or cats. Are you a dog or a cat person? And if you're a cat person, we're going to have words, but post in there whether you're a dog or a cat person, which is a classic Dan Tyre of HubSpot icebreaker. Katie Roberts has to listen to heavy metal music to focus. All right, cool. Yeah, I do tend to listen not to heavy metal, but I do have my favorite playlist, which is Chemical Brothers at the start of the morning, which annoys everybody in the house. Great background music seems to get everybody focused, and way more dog person people than cat people, which I think is entirely reasonable for those cat lovers out there. I think dogs are definitely better. Not to be controversial here, but doesn't seem to be many people defending the cats apart from Kaja. Put phone into airplane mode. That's a good idea. I'm going to do that now, Claude. I thought you were telling me to do it, but I'm actually going to do it. I'm going to take that as an instruction. Now I'm going to attempt. Anoa Rodriguez likes to have a podcast in the background. More of a hamster person, but they don't seem to be interested in their work, in your work. Well, that's what you think, Anoa. You think that the hamster is not interested in your work, but what that hamster could be doing is taking careful notes of your work, and they're probably interested in going off and setting up their own business. So always watch out for that in the background with your hamster. Active noise cancelling headphones. Yes, definitely the best thing since sliced bread. And Clued, I'm very disappointed to see you are a cat person as well. Great. Thank you. And Noah, I can't guarantee I'll get it right the second time, but we tried it the first time and it worked, so that'll do. Okay, so we've gone past 5 past, and I just want to get started on this conversation because I know we're going to cover a lot today. First of all, I just want to welcome everybody to the event. There's so much going on in, particularly in terms of virtual events, that it's always difficult to get your attention, and the community that we've built over the last couple of years has grown and grown, and I'm really grateful to everybody taking the time out today to join us for the Dublin HUG event. HUG means HubSpot User Group, but I think it's grown into a whole lot more than that over the last couple of years that we've been running the event. I remember the first one we ran in the EMEA headquarters here in Dublin. We had a good few people there, a great turnout, but that turnout just grew and grew. And what I really enjoyed about those events was being able to actually meet people in person, and to really have interesting conversations about the businesses that you're running. One of the things that Michael might not be familiar with is the kind of vibrant community of business owners, leaders, managers of marketing, managers of sales that are brought together under the HubSpot umbrella. So there's a lot of conversations that don't necessarily have everything to do with how HubSpot works or what HubSpot does for a business, more to do with what the goals for your business are and how you want to get there. and then how you can bring that back into something that HubSpot can help you do. So I've kind of tried to run our events in it being able to bring in conversations and people and experts who can help us to really master the craft of CRM and RevOps and marketing, so that everything is aligning, the vectors are aligning towards your business goals. And we've done a pretty good job of that so far. And I'm really excited about our guest today, Michael Jaffroy, I should say, because I always call you Jaffrey, and that leads to me putting an E in your name where it shouldn't be. And Michael is going to kind of explain a little bit about his background himself, but he's got a wealth of experience, particularly in growing businesses from a stage of growth where there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of things changing, there's a lot of transformation, there's a lot of transition. Taking that business that is growing at such a rapid and unpredictable rate towards a kind of a more operational point of view, a bit more predictable, a bit more public, because he has taken quite a few businesses to IPO stage, which for anyone who doesn't know, it means that the businesses he's worked with have gone public. So that means a whole lot of things to a whole lot of people. But essentially, from where we're coming from and running our businesses, it makes everything visible, it makes everything predictable, it makes it very important that you're streamlined and you know what you're doing. So Michael is going to offer us a wealth of experience. And the purpose of today's event is to have a conversation. So we're not going to dominate this conversation, and I'm certainly going to move on as quickly as I can. We're going to invite you to ask your questions. There is a Q&A panel over here, and there's also the general chat. Kaja and Mel are in the background to gather your questions, and at the end of the event today, we're going to spend more time answering questions than you might be typically used to, because as you know, we really like to have this interaction at our events. So today's agenda is just welcoming you guys to the event, and then just getting into our talk, which I should call out. The topic of our talk today is growing your business ABC, mapping your journey from IPO, or from seed to IPO with CRM, which is a mouthful in itself. The point being that we're going to give you kind of a roadmap or a sense of how to move from where you might be starting your business, or you might be midway through the growth of your business, to a point where you might want to go to IPO stage with your business, or to make the decision not to do so, and not to feel like there's an imperative to move to the public markets, or to think about where you are in your stage of growth, so you can kind of orientate yourself as you grow. And then the impact of that, and the impact on your people of things like CRM in that journey, and how that can help with sales enablement and revenue operations, which we'll go into in a bit more detail. Just to give you a little bit of sense of what we do, why we're running the HUG, I'm managing director of a company called Mount Arbor. Some of you may already be familiar with us. We may have worked together in the past. We specialize in RevOps, which is revenue operations and CRM. And we have a lot of clients, particularly selling B2B, because of those slower sales cycles you get in B2B. We have a growing team. We have an exclusive partnership with a company called DigiFinance, who won the Customer Focus Award from HubSpot this year over 6,000 other agencies. So we do have quite a broad reach in terms of what we can do and how we can scale with your business as we work with you. We've all the certifications you could ever need, and we're also a HubSpot Platinum Solutions partner. We provide kind of feedback on your sales and CRM. We provide an audit for that. So shameless plug here, if you do need somebody to look at your sales process, or your sales operations, or your revenue operations, and how you're growing your business, that's something we can do. It takes us about a week to turn around, but we'll be happy to do that free of charge. We have a really good RevOps quick start model and program, and then we look at your inbound marketing to grow and scale your business. One of the main things we do is run this event, and I've really enjoyed doing that because of the kind of caliber of people we've gotten in, and a lot of those people have come from the people that we would normally work with, B2B companies looking to scale their business, people trying to run campaigns and get their operations in order, and people going through digital transformation. So housekeeping, again, just use the chat panel, upvote your favorite questions using the little thumbs up sign. We did want to give you a load of free stuff today. We didn't get the link in time for the event, but we will be sending the link to you after the event. So there will be some free stuff that you can collect after the event for your participation. And then finally, just complete the questionnaire that will be pinned at the top of the chat panel once we've finished. Okay, so into the meat of it. Today, we want to talk about how to build your business into something that is predictable and is something that can lead to a performance business. So if you're at 20 employees, you might want to go 150. If you're at 100 employees, you might want to go to 500. And a lot of the time when we're dealing with new clients, there's always these same questions around the foundation, optimizing your sales process and automating that. And then looking at your people, enabling your people to sell at scale, and then performance, pushing into organizing your data. And in particular, the funny thing is we always start our conversations with business owners around the reporting. How can I see what's happening? And that's kind of a difficult thing to do. So we've kind of mapped it out in this process, and we'll kind of refer back to this a little bit with Michael if we need to, because it does help to orientate in the conversations that we have about revenue operations, and that you do need to take certain steps in a certain order. And we've been through multiple projects, revenue operations for people of different businesses of different sizes. And what we can do is we can maybe discuss, Michael, today about how different ways of building things essentially maybe need to be done in the correct order according to some kind of a playbook. And the playbook that we use is to start here at the bottom left and really to kind of build the foundation, make sure the foundational elements are in place, that you're doing the right things, and then moving into your people and your performance in order after that. So an example of that is get your CRM set up properly. Sometimes you need to pull out the wires and put it back together to be able to scale. And that often happens in the preamble Michael and I had. Even if people are very close to an IPO, they're not necessarily there yet. So we'll talk a little bit about that as people grow their businesses. How well organized do they actually become? And how useful is it to stop and reorganize versus keep going and grow? So with that, I'll introduce our guest and stop talking altogether. Michael Jaffroy is joining us today from Workato, and I'll let you just maybe give us a little bit of a background, Michael. And if you're modest at all, I'll jump in and make sure that we big you up even more.
Modesty is not one of my strong suits, I don't think, Andrew, but I have been working on it. So lovely to be here. Thank you for having me. Welcome and hello to everybody who's on the call. It's great to be at a HUG. It gives me a nice warm feeling. I love the branding of it. I was saying to Andrew before, I used to run mugs, which have a slightly different connotation in this part of the world as well, but that was when I was a MongoDB. And I started at MongoDB, even though I had a sales career before that and carried a bag in some of the very large tech companies. That was kind of where I started to see the light, I suppose, and it's interesting. You see all these different parts along the journey. If I'd known what all these parts were at the journey, I wouldn't have jumped around and gone to the end first and then come back to the start and then gone to like halfway through, I think, and then come back to the start and really jumped around. It actually reminds me a bit of a snakes and ladders board. If you don't follow the path in the right way, you actually end up with a snake and end up going right back to where you started and having, like Andrew said, to re-architect it. But yeah, I joined MongoDB, which I don't know if people know or not, but it was one of the largest IPOs to come out of New York until one of the other companies I joined, Datadog, which was the largest IPO to come out of New York in the last 10, 15 years. A very well-respected, large, I think $20 billion market cap company at this stage, but I joined them in Dublin as their first inside salesperson when there was 5 of us in what was soon to become Silicon Docks down Sir John Rogerson's Quay years ago as a salesperson to grow my career and learn what it was like to work in this kind of startup environment. Through that, I ended up pivoting, I suppose, gravitating towards talking to people. I ended up like building enablement and onboarding programs without knowing I was doing that, and they created a role for me called sales enablement, which I didn't know what it was at the time. I didn't even know it was a thing. I didn't even know you could actually get paid to join the dots for salespeople between the technology, what our customers care about, and what you can say to them to add value or demystify what the good things are going to happen if they pay for our product and the bad things are going to happen if they don't. So started down this path on sales enablement, actually created a similar user group like this, and I'm still the founding president of the Irish chapter of the Sales Enablement Society. But that path, which I intentionally took and stayed away from the role I'm in now. So I was asked to be an SDR leader at MongoDB, but said no. I really, really get a lot of energy about making salespeople's lives easier, making them more efficient in their day, taking out any of the admin or the distractions or the bad processes, and either trying to automate or in some way make their lives easier so they can focus on what they're great at, which is, finding pain and closing deals. And that's a bit about the predictability. That's how you get from those like early days to somebody wanting to give you money as well. So that was my first experience in doing that. Built an outbound pipeline generation engine for that company, which took us towards IPO, which is something I hadn't really heard of before I joined there. But it turns out they're quite exciting and also quite lucrative as well. I won't skip over the LinkedIn part. But I went there to get an idea of what it looks like at scale, from going from the small startup to the giant behemoth, and having an impact and an understanding of what it takes to get that predictability at scale. So when you're trying to ramp new people and you have this predictable, scalable process, and you can understand how long is it going to take for this person who I've hired in their role, wherever it is, to get to a level of productivity. And as a metric there, I always love time to first close significant deals. So they've actually done something and are adding value to the business. If you can say that's going to be 45 days and it's going to cost 100 grand to hire them, then you can really understand, how much fuel you can start adding into your acquisition of salespeople and your growth, to understand what you're going to get out the other end. But it turns out I'm not a big fan of the giant behemoths and the slow moving processes. I really want to work in environments where the only thing that's constant is change, because I like to move at a fast pace. Like, I've got a bit better now at documenting my processes, and like the slide you had up there, Andrew, is actually, I think the first time you showed me that, I was like, oh, that's actually what I've been doing for like years, but I didn't know I was following this process and had to figure it out the hard way. And I think you mentioned it as well, like those companies that you look at that are on the NASDAQ now, like I joined Datadog after that. Segment, who was my last one before Workato, which was acquired by Twilio. Like, they haven't figured this stuff out in such a clean, succinct way. And, understanding internally in those organizations where the pain points are and where you are in this journey, even if you've just done a massive splash on the NASDAQ and have 800 people working for you and have market caps in 9 figures. Like, the foundational parts of this, they're not there. Like, when we worked in MongoDB, every person we hired had used a CRM in a different way in their organization. And we took that on board and pivoted, changed our process, brought in lead scoring, brought in a different way of looking at it. Here's a new dashboard, and they were a mess. Like, people were never looking at the same parts of the data. In my next part of the journey in Datadog was very focused on sales enablement and getting this predictable ramp from different parts of the organization, from the SDR, the junior salespeople, to the salespeople, and focusing on the outbound pipeline generation. But it's so hard to do that when you're not looking at a single source of truth with regards to their performance, and also with regards to the data you're putting in. So what is in there about your customers, and what is in there about, why they are, who's bought from us? Like, where's the data on who's looked at us there? Sorry, Andrew.
That's a great introduction. And what I want to join in a little bit with you is to reorientate ourselves when it comes to what you've kind of talked about, and where people might in our audience might position themselves regarding their own business. Because what you've done is you've gone through 3 or 4 different companies that you've helped to grow, and one of those companies being LinkedIn, which is already grown, and it's the grown-up version of this. And that with each of those companies, you're coming in with a title or a role that allows you to interact with the CRM, with the sales process, with the people themselves, with the salespeople themselves, which I hope everyone in the audience has some degree of understanding of where they fit into that model, like where they might interact with salespeople, or they might interact with the CRM, or they might interact with how to enable salespeople and marketing people to sell the products that they sell. So to help us orientate ourselves, we'll look at the graph that we talked about, and maybe you can kind of give us a sense of where you have been living most of the time, and where you might see some of the issues come up when it comes to things like scaling and training your people and onboarding. And one of the things you mentioned in particular, and we could go all sorts of directions, but why don't we think about Johnny the BDR or Mary the BDR who comes on board next week and has 45 days to make her first sale. So in any sense, that's going to be a difficult thing for someone to do. But if it's a complex product, or if it's something that they need to be trained on, that's difficult enough. But if things are getting in their way, friction, as HubSpot calls it, where does that friction occur, and where is it different as you move through this graph?
I love the valley of death. It sounds particularly ominous there. Yeah, I mean, it's really important to understand, first of all, most companies, most startups, like they don't get it right, and they don't get to even first, second, or third stage. I mean, the valley of death is quite important, and sometimes you don't know how you've got out of the valley of death, but that's where it's really important to try and understand. LinkedIn have a similar way of searching in, I think it's Sales Navigator. You can pick like the rock star that you've worked with and go find me people like that. And it's essentially that's the way you get up from first to second to third stage, is by identifying not only who your ideal customers are and why they've bought from you, but also who your ideal salespeople are, or who your ideal BDRs are, and kind of carbon copying them and documenting what they did and what you do. So as you shorten that sales cycle, you demystify it, very intentional about, the steps in it. And that's where, we've seen with the company I'm working with recently is, having really tight sales process baked into your CRM means that people know how to follow that journey. And believe it or not, you could validate this if you spoke to any of the very senior leadership in LinkedIn, but they tried to do this. They were like, we need to have a sales methodology to have a predictable revenue engine. Microsoft have bought us now. They're going to start looking at what we're doing, and they're going to F with our S if we don't hit our numbers, and we don't want them to touch our culture. So they built out this sales methodology called the LinkedIn Way, which is slightly evangelical, but somebody didn't think that, having the different stages in this LinkedIn Way sales methodology they were rolling out to match their CRM. I know everybody here is going how is that possible? And again, this is the insight that I have, I suppose, is from actually seeing people who have driven billions in revenue and still haven't got the basics right at the start from a project management point of view. So obviously, if you don't have the same name for a sales stage in a process you're trying to follow, matching your CRM fields, obviously people aren't going to put it in the right place, and they're not going to know when they're moving to the next stage. This was a wheel, the LinkedIn Way, and literally the wheels fell off on this, and it wasn't adopted, wasn't reinforced. And what you had was these siloed different parts of the business just following their own process. And, they're actually passed all the way up in the top right or left, whichever side of this graph I'm pointing at here. And they got there because they had unique differentiation of a product. You can't sell now in the modern tech world without Sales Nav. But not all of us are going to have the opportunity to have a product that is so uniquely differentiated that we can just skip all of this stuff here. So what I'm trying to say basically is the basics of the process, documenting and understanding how that can remove all the frictions from each stages, and understanding who's involved in all those processes gets you from first to second to third in the smoothest way possible. Okay,
so Michael, I'm going to let you do your thing, which is super fast and really, really cool, because you're covering everything that we could possibly want to worry about. And then for my own benefit, I'm going to play it back so that I understand what you're saying. Okay. So what you mentioned there was just the fact that at a phase of growth that LinkedIn was in, there were certain processes and methodology that everyone kind of agreed the LinkedIn Way was going to bring LinkedIn to the sales targets that they wanted to hit. So it was people-based and it was based on process. But that didn't match up with what was going on in the CRM and the operational side of things. And when you start to look at that in terms of something that can help you sell, like Sales Navigator, it doesn't necessarily gel if the technology isn't matched with the processes and so on that you're implementing throughout the organization. And one of the things that Dharmesh Shah from HubSpot, who's one of the founders of HubSpot, talks about is the idea of aligning your vectors. He got it off Elon Musk. He asked Elon Musk, how do you make sure that your business grows at the way that Elon Musk is able to grow his business? And he just simply replied, align your vectors. And looking into it, it means aligning the people and the technology in one direction so everything works. So the bad news is that a lot of us are in the position where those vectors aren't aligned. LinkedIn wasn't in that position when they were working on the LinkedIn way, yet they were still selling, they're still growing, everything was fine. So there's a bit of triage that needs to happen, a bit of the essential things need to be taken care of. One of the things you mentioned in our chats before this event was that one of your secret weapons is saying no, that you're good at saying no. Maybe explain a little bit in terms of how you're able to prioritize things, how you're able to say no, and how you're able to find the essential things when, aligning vectors and making everything flow like a perfect flywheel with no friction is actually quite a difficult thing to do, even with the perfect CRM, even with HubSpot set up correctly, even with your people believing in your vision and being mission driven. What are the things that you're doing to allow these companies to get over the hump?
Yeah, I once got that compliment that I was so proud of saying no, and someone nearly fell off their chair laughing, going you're probably the best person at saying no I've ever worked with. And yeah, we used to work for a guy in Datadog who gave us this great soundbite to be able to kind of push back with all the asks that weren't aligning the vectors. And it was we only work on projects that are going to 10x the business, and as leadership, you care about three things: revenue, risk, and cost. And everything needs to align to those. But, how are we going to measure it? We take a Kirkpatrick method, looking at before and after. I used to get asks every day. It was always, my team needs this, my part of the business needs this, and that was one of the hardest things, to ask people to kind of go slow so as we can actually move fast in the end, or do the hard things now to make sure that we can scale. And that's where you understand whether the people making the ask actually even understand what their business is doing at the moment, whether they have the visibility into it or not, and whether they understand where it's broken. So it's really, documenting, understanding how all the parts that you do have an impact around the other people in the business, mapping that out, loving out timeline or a flow chart to be able to understand that, and understand if we turn that dial, is it going to have the impact you want? What are the KPIs? How are you tracking and even measuring this? Can you even track and measure this? And, that was something that all of the sales leaders I've worked with, from partnering from a sales enablement or a RevOps or a field sales strategy role point of view, they really appreciated, not just somebody going, yeah, I've done it, actually kind of stopping and saying, right, well, what is the expected behavior happening here? What does success look like here? It's like a sales technique that I used to train people on when we're value selling. It's where's the delta here? You've got the before and the negative things. So you've come to me and said, I need this solved because of this. But have you even stood in the future and looked at the future state and understood, what are the positive business things that are going to happen here? And what does that future state look like? And okay, well, let's stick a triangle in the middle and understand what's the difference here. Is it actually big enough that I should be investing my time here?
Is that mostly numbers based, Michael? I mean, if, for example, I have a business, my guess is, and let me know in the chat, everyone, if my guess is correct here, because we could have a few outliers in the group, but my guess is that most of our guests today are positioned probably at the early stage. So if anybody is listening to this still, and hopefully you are, and you're still with us, just post in the chat where you would see yourself on this graph. So are you at the early stage? Are you the first, second, third stage of that early stage where you're getting funding for your business? Or if you're a private business, are you going to the bank for loans and guarantees because you're a bit more evolved? Are you later stage or early stage? My guess is a lot of people are probably at the earlier stages. And when you're talking about setting those goals for sales, is it all numbers based, or is there a top three things that you really need to focus on when it comes to setting the goals for your CRM, for your sales team, for your marketing team, for your sales leadership. So how do you prioritize your top 3 things apart from the revenue, the number that you need to hit in terms of your goal? Are there other goals that you might want to talk about in terms of KPIs?
Was that a question for me?
That's a question for you. Sorry, I went from asking Mark Basquiel, who's a bootstrap private business, year 3. Well done, Mark. I've the utmost respect for that. And Katie Roberts is 11 years in. Very early stages. Caroline Quinlan, just a small weekend business. Very good. So all of this is going to allow us to kind of position ourselves in all of this. 3 years in the business now. Shrey is 3 years in the business. So I think a lot of people we're talking to are probably working their way up to break even, or they're moving into a more reliable, better system-driven company where they've kind of got their operations in order. I imagine Katie Roberts, when she comes into work in the morning, probably has a better sense of what she's going to do that day than I do coming into my business 3 or 4 years in, where I kind of have to make it up as I go along a lot of the time. So what are the main things that you would look for at the later stages that you work with businesses where you're going, look, we need to have KPIs, but what are the most important things apart from, you mentioned earlier, the time to first sale?
It's the one that, there was some survey done of VPs of sales in the Valley there about 3 years ago, and it's the one that, all of them said that they measured like how well they're scaling on. It's that time to productivity, like, so that really gives you an understanding of targets have been set. We've agreed with the board. We need to hit X amount of revenue. I need a certain amount of people. Like if I really understand, how long it's going to take me to get them productive, like, what is the ramp for a salesperson, then I can understand if I invest X amount in hiring, that like I will get Y amount out at the end. And it's the one that's like the hardest to do initially, I suppose, and why anchor on something as simple as time to first close deal. But yeah, I mean, you have to have the data. Like, the data is the only thing that can't lie. Like, as Sue Barrowman, who's on the board of a few companies I worked on, says, like, you interrogate the data until it doesn't lie, because it's the one thing that you can anchor on. So it's your sales performance, your history, like the orders that you have in your system and how long they took to close, and the sales cycles involved there. Like, really digging in and understanding what the data is in your CRM that can tell you about your business, to understand which dials to turn, because you can throw money at marketing, or you can throw money at salespeople, but if you don't understand where the leaky bucket is, or where you're having those rates. I mean, we at the moment in Mercado are looking at our conversion rates, and I've generally worked in large American multinational companies where they don't actually factor in EMEA as separated out, and at times I found out 6-9 months later, actually our conversion rate here, the model we worked on was a conversion rate of 3x our pipeline, and we've invested a couple of million over here based on that, but actually our conversion rate's 7x in EMEA. So we needed to spend less on people and more on marketing, and somebody's made a bad decision on that as well.
Explain that a little bit, Michael. So what in terms of conversion rate for a smaller business, it's the same thing, but just give us an idea of what you mean by 3x your pipeline and 7x your pipeline. Is that in terms of the funnel that you're looking at leads, or is it more?
So I need to have if my target's 100 grand, I need to have 300 grand worth of stage 1 pipeline. So whatever the first stage of your funnel is, so qualified pipeline. Like, so got a lead in, a marketing lead, and I've qualified it as this is a valid opportunity in whatever qualification criteria you have. And I won't start going down on a BANT, MEDPIC, chump, spiced channel there, but it's very important to have qualification criteria if anyone doesn't have those there, and to understand that. And I know people at very early stages, sometimes don't do that. So I'd encourage everyone to at least look at BANT, which is BANT, Budget Authority Need Timeline, as at least some way of kind of understanding whether or not they have a qualified opportunity. We need to have basically for every 3 of those, I'm going to close 1. And it's very strange when you've worked in like 5 or 6 hyper growth unicorn IPO startups, like, and everyone seems to have 3x as their number, and it's like, really, how can it be quite so round a figure, that somebody hasn't kind of made it up, which is quite scary. But again, huge validation that, you know, doesn't really always the $1 billion valuation doesn't really always mean you know what you're doing. It just means that you've kind of either pick the right numbers or the right people to do this for you. But yeah, it's just basically having 3x your pipeline. So 3 times the amount of qualified opportunities, knowing that only 1 out of 3 of those is going to close. But if you need 7x, it means you actually, your close rate is not 33%. It's like, now I'm giving myself a terrible fraction to do in my head.
It's like more closer to 12% or lower.
So we're in and around that number. So it obviously means that, you know, I don't need more salespeople. I need more opportunities. So I needed to invest.
Okay,
more
so this is
funnel,
absolutely key. Yeah. So this is key to all of this, I think, and we're getting into, I suppose, what it does take to move from where a lot of the guys are at in their business at the moment, to the seed stage, the growth phases that they're at in the early stages, to getting to that end result. You mentioned the right people, the right processes, and also the right expectations, and making sure that qualification is a key part of that. So without getting into the BANT and everything else, methodology stuff, and before we even get into the methodology stuff at all, we should say that there are multiple methodologies. There are lots of ways to look at this. And I know that, you know, HubSpot is, just to plug the book that HubSpot have, Inbound Selling, by Brian Signorelli, is a great book. But what he's done is he's kind of looked at how you can use inbound to qualify leads before you even speak to them. And Katie Roberts actually posted in the chat there, everybody wants to talk to Katie because she's so much fun to talk to, but she uses a fit matrix where they have to score 5 out of 12 for them to win the conversation with her. So a nice way to look at it in terms of how many people are you going to need to line up for Katie to qualify in order to have enough conversations per week to fill the pipeline the way you need to. And I imagine that at scale, that's pretty crazy in terms of the numbers, in order to get people through the pipeline and closing as customers. So how does it influence people's behaviors, people's excuse making around qualification, and how do you kind of set the traps along the way to make sure that anybody who isn't qualified is qualified out, almost more importantly, qualifying out those that might take a bit of work?
You really kind of hit on a very interesting topic there. I actually built a session for Datadog about, you know, disqualification, because it's one of the most important things. Like, if you be able to understand from your data with regards to your sales cycles, like if an opportunity is there for longer than 30 days in the same stage, like, who are you kidding? Like, it's dead, move on. Like, it's wasted time in chasing things that aren't qualified. So a fit method, like, and kind of constant qualification. So, like, you know, the only thing is constant is change. Things are changing. Like, they have to continually hit those, hopefully for Katie's point of view, they always hit those 5 stages, like, to keep progressing and keep being worthy of our time. Because that's the only thing you can't give people is time. So if you're wasting it on people you should be qualifying out immediately, it's one of the key things you see in all organizations I've worked in, is like people hanging on to deals, whether they go logo blind from like it's such a good brand, we really want to get it, to like, you know, but they don't have a use case. It's not a good title. Like, there's no projects there. Like, you know, no one's going to get us access to power. Like, and you've been hanging around for 100 days there. We could have been focusing on some quick wins somewhere else. Like, you know, we used to do this thing in MongoDB called win fast, lose fast. We need to really understand where you invest your time. Like, you know, where your qualifying early, like, because your time is valuable. You know, you use qualification for your customers and for yourself, so as you can identify where you can prioritize your resources, and you help your customer understand like why they're speaking to you. So when whoever they need to sell internally, whether it's like to their boss, to the CEO, to the board. Like, they can justify, this is why we're interacting with Mount Arbor in this instance, or Mercado. Because if they haven't qualified themselves and have an understanding of why they're interacting with you, then, you know, they're not going to be able to sell on your behalf. And you don't close any deals unless you have a champion somewhere who gets it over the line, because it's not easy to buy things. You have to go through processes no matter where you are.
Yeah. So you've mentioned a couple of things there, I guess, around the essentials, you know, one of which is to have a decent idea of what you need to have checked off the list in terms of qualification. And, you know, a lot of the B2B stuff that you see in sales is that the person who's purchasing your product or service is actually selling it for you internally. They're the ones that are taking it, you know, offline and talking to their colleagues, and you're basically enabling those people with your stuff to go off and sell it for you. And a lot of the time, even in terms of retrospective analysis of closed won deals, where you're looking at deals you've actually won, those people can be involved in giving you feedback as to how the sales process was for them and whether or not there should be changes and so on. You can learn from those people because they're almost a part of your business by the time you close a deal. And you, having worked with these like monster growth companies like MongoDB and Datadog, who went to IPO stage, they sold for billions of gazillions of dollars, and you know, and everybody came out great. But there was obviously an intense pressure there at those stages of when you joined to get it right, to really understand what the critical things were. So whereas we've the luxury of choosing how to set up our CRM, and a lot of the time it's custom. Like, we will work with clients quite a lot who have a custom build, and they'll work with the methodology a little bit, but their salespeople have their way, and that kind of things start to fall over as you grow bigger and faster. But talk about a little bit about as David Kenny has pointed out, high level data to drive strategy, those dashboards that you want to see at the board level, at the management level. But then what about the individual level of coaching that you're particularly adept at, working with those people who are under that intense pressure, that are working with possibly a faulty CRM? So they may be pointing at that CRM going, it's not me, it's the CRM, it's the operations, I didn't get what I needed. How are you working with those people to coach them, to give them what they need on an individual level?
It's a really interesting question, you know, and it is kind of, you know, the CRM can't talk back. So it's always easy for people to point at, like, you know, oh, well, I have been doing those behaviors, etc. as well. It just isn't reflected here, you know. It's like, you know, it's a conversation I've had on very many occasions. It's always great when you set up a coaching session with somebody on topics like that, and they've decided to do it on their phone, not in front of their laptop, so they still can't interact with the CRM in a well-behaved way. I've been really lucky that most of the companies I've worked with have really forced salespeople to actually input data into the CRM, you know, and that's what builds this continuity and enables you to build dashboards from a coaching point of view, to make sure, you know, every part of the activity level and funnel is being documented. And then you can see from a cohort point of view, like, who are the laggards and who are the leading people as well. So, you know, you start from day one, from building a tight, rigorous, I would nearly say, onboarding program that has milestones in it. So you build in certifications to identify whether people are in need of the coaching and where you need to invest from day one. And as they're going through their career, being able to enable their leadership with dashboards to identify from an activity, from a closed one, from a certain amount of, you know, basic stuff like contacts added to CRM, phone calls, emails, created opportunities, days in stages of sales cycle, having all that in a dashboard format for their leadership to be able to see, you know, who's in the red zone, who's in the green zone. Obviously, the red zone and the green zone are different for every organization, because one organization might be doing a volume of like 50 deals a quarter. Another one might be doing, if you do 2 all year, that's fine, you know. So there's always different metrics there that you want to be looking at. But yeah, the data, again, when you look at dashboards for coaching for performance, like, if people aren't actively leveraging the CRM, then the data isn't lying, but, you know, the salesperson is not doing the right behaviors and maybe doesn't like that inspection. And I think we've all worked with people who don't like that. We can afford to have some artists in organizations, but if you want to be able to scale and make it predictable, people have to follow the processes and the structures and enter the data to be able to, so you can help them and understand where should I be having my focus, because the guy or girl who isn't inputting the stuff in the CRM, like, how are you going to coach that? Like, you know, where are you going to focus your time? Like, you know, is it discovery? Is it qualification? Is it negotiation? Is it even more basic around the technology? You know, I mean, there's no point in investing and enabling people on products continually when actually, you know, they just don't understand the persona that they're selling.
Yeah. One of the things that we talk a lot about, I suppose, when it comes to the CRM and setting up your sales organization and revenue operations, which in a way, I'm kind of glad that we haven't really got into the definition of what revenue operations actually is, because there's a lot of conversation, particularly in the HubSpot world at the moment, about revenue operations, RevOps, and you've been working in RevOps for years. It wasn't always called that, but generally speaking, it kind of brings in sales, it brings in a bit of marketing, it brings in sales enablement, it brings in sales training and coaching. There's a whole lot to it that marry the revenue to the operational element of what you do. So based on like a general definition of revenue operations, and correct me if your definition is slightly wrong or different, I should say, what makes a good salesperson in today's world of data-driven sales? And then what makes a good setup? Like, what would you recommend our audience focus on for the next 3 to 6 months to enable them to scale from that early stage to possibly a bigger organization, or else to constrain themselves to remain where they are, but to optimize where they are so they don't accidentally fall into the kind of traps that happen to bigger businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the you know, doing more, but doing it, not necessarily doing it with less, but doing it with what you have, really understanding your business. Like, and that's where the RevOps role kind of, for me, comes in. Like, I was smiling there when Andrew was describing this, because I, at Segment, actually was given a RevOps title, didn't know what it was, and then got some headcount, and like one of the VPs said to me, now, do you actually know what RevOps is? How are you going to hire somebody if you don't know? And I actually couldn't define it for him. He's like, right, you need to go and figure it out before you're allowed to have headcount for that role. And it was during that process I realized it was all the roles I'd done previously, all under this one umbrella, and was able to align those vectors of sales ops, marketing ops, and sales enablement as this true partner of sales. It's like all of these functions that are supporting sales that are not always pulling in the right direction, or don't even know what the others are doing. And it's not their fault. They don't have that communication, and they're linked up under this RevOps umbrella. And the reason I'm redefining, just clarifying definitions there, is to really understand that like, I'm not saying you need to set up a RevOps function. You just need to understand that, you know, the people in marketing, the people in sales, the people in marketing ops, the people in sales ops, the people who may be training or enabling or delivering your training for their outside consultancy, like, if they all don't have a person who can communicate across all three of them and make sure that they all understand what board level, C-level, whatever it is in your organization's goals are, how are they possibly meant to know whether they're doing the right things or adding value to have impact? So don't throw money at something unless you really understand whether all the people who are currently doing their jobs understand the impact and the value, and, you know, what their goals should be to align with the company level goals, whether it's revenue, risk, or cost, or if it's customer acquisition. You know, if you don't get that clear communication strategy built out of the data, that you should have currently good data in your CRM, because there's nothing worse than working on bad data. To focus on that, because, you know, if you can have all those people even understanding the common goal, then you can identify where the investment should be to get you to whatever your company's goals are, whether it's acquiring customers, or whether it's increasing revenue, or expanding into new markets, because that's what gets you from stage 1 to stage 2, and stage 2 to stage 3, and stage 3 to the sky's the limit, is the predictability and understanding of what it requires to get there.
So what I'm going to take away from this conversation, Michael, apart from everything else that you've shared today, as we move into questions and answers, and hopefully bring some of the guys into this conversation for the last few minutes, it's very important to know where you're headed. It's very important to know what the goals are and to clarify those for everyone, because that's your checkpoint. Is it getting us there, or is it taking us off course? And it's quite simple from your point of view. You've always got a clear view of that. And I know that we could do a whole other session. In fact, if anyone would be interested in this for our next hug, we could actually talk to people a little bit. You don't have to be at this one, Michael, but you're welcome to join, where we bring people through how you can essentially build those goals into HubSpot, because a lot of that stuff, the functionality in the CRM is in there, but maybe people don't quite know how to match that to the stuff they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So putting goals in, they don't necessarily have to be financial goals, revenue goals. They can be, how many meetings do we have to have this week? How many people do we need to talk to? How many people do we need to qualify? What do we need to clarify with the people we speak to in order to be able to move further towards our goal? And one of the questions that come up in the Q&A from Deepak is an interesting one, because it sounds like Deepak is at a very early stage in his sales process. He's looking to validate his idea in his process. What type of data should he be looking for when he's putting out his idea to the world? And it looks like Deepak is using his website landing page, his sales webpage, to have feedback come in. So we can start with that, like in terms of a question. He's wondering what kind of data to look for. But I want to kind of load his question a little bit, skew it a little bit from your point of view. Should he be using the website to test his idea, or should he be looking to have more sales conversations and qualify, to develop his qualification criteria based on your experience, where Deepak might be in 3 years' time and looking back at this? You're going to give him a nugget of truth here that'll make Deepak a multimillionaire.
Well, funnily enough, like the guys in Segment, when they first built that company, you know, they threw out a few lines of code to see whether, you know, it resonated with people, trying to prove that the idea was wrong, so as the founders could move on to something else, and everyone loved it. But it took them 2 years to actually go and speak to their customers. So they built what they felt was this amazing product, but they hadn't really talked to the people who'd spent money on it. So before they went to seek additional investments, so the smartest person in the room went, "Why do your customers actually use your product? Do you even know?" And they went, and they're like, "Of course we do. It's because of this, it's because of this." And they were sitting in a room going, "Okay, we all think different things. We got to go and ask them." And it turns out every single of their large lighthouse customers, the top 10 people spending money with them, were all using it to basically do extract, transfer, and load from Amazon Redshift into their marketing technology tools, because it was brilliant at translating it into a way that they could use it. And they did not know that this is why those people had signed the checks over. And so they had this kind of epiphany where, like, okay, we're humble enough to go, okay, we didn't know what our customers were actually spending money for, but now we know. And so now we can focus on, okay, if that's where they're getting value from our product, then we can invest in our products and marketing and sales in that point as well there. So, you know, it's great getting all these emails in, but like the myth there is like thinking that people are buying it for the reason that you think they're buying it, and really understanding what the value is that they're getting out. So talking to your customers.
So talking to your customer is probably where the CRM comes in as well, because you're gathering that data and that's how you circulate it. So it doesn't just stay with the salesperson. Margarita, I'm not ignoring your question, but I think Michael's addressing it slightly. Margarita was wondering when a startup company should consider localization of their product on their website and stuff. But again, that's just, you know, you don't necessarily need to do it all on the website. You can do it through your sales function and then operationalize it. So hire someone to localize.
Has Margarita been talking to the salespeople in my current company who've been giving me crap about this for like the last couple of months? Right. So what our CEO, who's the guy who founded Tibco and founded Workato as well, and so, you know, he ran Oracle Fusion middleware for a couple of years for Larry Ellison as well. This came up recently in our QBRs because we were talking about having local language inbound support. And, you know, at MongoDB, I think we localized maybe the year before our IPO. In Datadog, despite the fact they have French founders, you know, the localization, other than in French, hasn't happened in any other languages up to this point. You know, Segments didn't do it. You know, you get kind of down a rabbit hole, if you will. But basically, most of the companies I work for have been American tech startups. Like their website's in English, you interact with it in English, you expect it to come back in English. And when it comes to localization, it's really something that people don't focus on. You know, you try and hire people who speak native language for markets, but other than that, we're very lucky, I suppose, in this country. Like most people sell and buy in English, and even if they don't, you know, it's very much the, you know, translation of products and website, etc. Like it's not expected. Like in regions like Italy and Spain, people are like, oh great, there is an Italian or a Spanish version here. But we've all been educated to understand that, you know, most of the companies we've bought or sold from don't provide localization. So it's definitely not a requirement that I've seen anybody, or a restriction, or something that has hurt growth in any sort of way. Like people love it if you do some small amount of it. Problem is, if you do some small amount of it, then everything has to be
okay.
In those sense.
Okay,
so answer, I think I was clear enough there. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm just watching the time because everybody wants to go off and have their lunch. So what I would like to kind of finish with is to thank you, Michael, for joining us today. There is a survey link there in the chat, and I'm really, really happy that so many people joined us on the event. We will be circulating the recording afterwards. If I could take anything away from today's conversation, Michael, it's that prioritization, like knowing where you're going to put your energy and then focusing on that so that you stay on the right track, is a key to whatever stage of growth you're at. And it's easy to get pulled into rabbit holes, but saying no is a good idea a lot of the time. And really talking to customers before you scale anything is also an approach that really helps, certainly early stage businesses. And then as you grow, it's still a problem. So a good problem to solve. So listen, thank you, Michael. Thank you to everyone who attended today. We're at 1 o'clock on the dot, so we've actually finished on time. I will see you all again. We'll follow up with an email to follow up with every single person who is here, and those who weren't, we'll give you a recording of the event, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks, Michael. I'm just letting everybody just drop off there. They're all saying it was great crack and really good and well done. Very pleased with the feedback there. And thanks, Kaja and Mel, for watching the background. All right, I'll just stop the recording.